Hey everyone, hope you're doing well today. This is Nick. Got another video for you. Today's topic is the insulin response graph in humans, a super important educational tool that tells us a lot about our natural diet and kind of the diet that we're predisposed by nature and biology to participate in. So we're at my website, Savananda. We're at a publication. We're at a publication called Chlorella, the plant-like animal vegan B12 supplement. There's a couple of things that I wanted to go over here. So, okay, this is one of the health experts, Dr. Greger, from this website here, Live Kindly, Where Do Vegans Get Their B12 From? Check out the article. Scroll all the way down here. Okay, so it says instead of taking B12 supplements, it's possible to get the sufficient amounts of B12 from B12 fortified foods. And those fortified foods he's talking about are like cereals and grains that are fortified, quote unquote, by big pharma, big ag with the fake B12 genetically modified bacteria. And so let's see what this expert recommends. He says you need 3 servings a day, providing at least 25% of the daily value, with each serving eaten at least 4 to 6 hours after the last. So you need to eat this many servings because the human body requires a huge amount of B12, and so you have to regularly eat it because the nutrition level in this kind of stuff is very low, and so you have to reintroduce it to your body over and over and over again on a regular basis. Whereas if you get it from a natural source like animals, one serving will last you quite a while because it contains far more than this fake big pharma stuff. So he says you have to eat it at least 4 to 6 hours. Okay, so now we're at another one of my article publications here called Carb Ptosis. You don't really see this in the medical literature. All there is ketosis, but there's no term for glycolysis or the process of being in glycolysis. So I had to invent this term called Carb Ptosis. So we have this insulin response graph, right? And usually it's very incomplete, so I had to actually create this other graph to include the hours here. So this is a 6-hour window. Okay, so he's saying that you want to eat these fortified foods with the added B12 supplementation every 4 to 6 hours. Okay, so this is a 6-hour insulin response graph. So when we eat a carbohydrate, anything that's not animal based, your insulin spikes and it comes back down, and it takes around 2 hours, and protein takes longer. So the more carbs you have to eat, the longer your insulin spikes. And so because this doctor is saying you have to get the B12 supplementation through your diet if you're a vegan, consuming things like B12 fortified cereals, you have to consume it every 4 hours. So that means that your body is not going to be all the way done with the insulin response if you're having to consume it regularly. So what does that mean? You eat it, your insulin response goes up to handle the sugars, and then as it's coming down, you have to eat it again. And so before the insulin response can get all the way back to 0, it's going back up again because the vegans need higher amounts of B12 or else they won't feel well. And so, you have to eat it again though, because it's every 4 hours. So every time your insulin response is coming down, you're sending it back up before it can get all the way down to 0. And that's what a condition that leads to what's called insulin resistance, a precursor to diabetes. Whereas if you're eating animal fats, primarily a diet of animal fats, you never have an insulin response. So you never get this problem with insulin resistance, especially because when you're, for instance, carnivores, this is from another one of my articles, but like for instance, lions, they don't need to eat all day long. They eat maybe like once a week, twice a week. So there's a lot of time in between for their insulin response to drop. Whereas a vegan or a plant-based animal, like a gorilla, has to eat constantly. And then that's what we're looking at here with the human insulin response graph. We are primarily carnivores, and we're supposed to only eat carbohydrates in emergencies when we can't get the meat. And the reason how we know that is because the carbohydrates spike our insulin to such a degree that if we continue eating carbohydrates like all day long, like a vegan has to eat a lot of plant-based foods because the nutrition level is not adequate for the human brain. And so quite often you'll see vegans having this insulin response problems with non-alcoholic related fatty liver, because they're eating before their insulin response time can drop. And so it's only getting halfway, and then it spikes again, and it spikes again, and then that's how you get the insulin resistance problem. So just keep that in mind. If you're a vegan, you want to have long windows between eating, or else it's going to hurt your liver and your kidneys. So if you're a vegan, you would want to eat maybe twice a day. Once a day would be best, just to make sure that your body stays in natural homeostasis. Okay, so we're at another publication here on my website, The Natural Human Animal. We're going to go down here, check out the article. So primarily frutivore, herbivore primates, they're getting their vitamin B12 from bugs and little critters like mice and stuff wherever they can. But when we look at their abdomens here, we see that it's like a very bloated belly because they have a fermentation chamber. Let's see here. So here's the human intestine, right? Here's the orangutan intestine. It has this big, gigantic fermentation chamber in which they derive nutrients through fermentation. But humans, it's almost completely disappeared. And the other thing about this is the orangutan and the great apes, they have a large appendix, super, super large appendix, whereas humans have a very small appendix. And the reason why is because when we're eating lots of plant foods, those plant foods have a lot of protective toxins to prevent the plant from being eaten so that it can survive. It's the only defense mechanisms plants have. And so those toxins, quote unquote, are actually what doctors refer to as antibiotics. Kind of like oregano oil or garlic or the allium family, like onions. And so every time you're eating antibiotics, you're destroying the biology, the microorganisms that help us digest food. You're destroying those organisms in your stomach. And so the appendix's job is to reintroduce these organisms back into your stomach so that you can continue metabolization. But in humans, the appendix is tiny, and people have all the time they have to get their appendix out because of a mostly plant-based diet. There's too much stuff in there that we're not supposed to be eating, and it causes appendicitis because the appendix will become inflamed because it's trying to reintroduce the bacteria so much, because there's not large enough windows between the plant-based foods and the animal-based foods. Because on the TV they say that we're omnivores, but mostly our people are still utilizing like a 75% plant-based diet. Even for someone who's eating meat, who only eats maybe 20 to 30% meat per meal, they're still eating a plant-based diet, and that means that all of these plant toxins, what are referred to as naturally occurring antibiotics in the medical literature, They're destroying our intestinal bacteria, and because of that, our appendix has to reintroduce this bacteria, and eventually it can't keep up. It gets inflamed and it'll explode. And that's when you have to get the appendectomy. So yeah, just keep this in mind for vegans. You want to make sure to have long periods between your eating windows, and I would recommend like a keto vegan diet, even though that it will have to depend or rely on like massive importation of like medium chain triglycerides, like coconut oil, raw organic, beyond organic if possible. Coconut oil would be the best for vegans. Things like walnuts, but you're going to need like nut butters to get the proper concentration of B12. So yeah, just keep all this stuff in mind. This information is not accessible by our people at this time. That's why I had to create all these graphs and these articles and stuff like that. But it's super important because the insulin resistance does lead to diabetes. And so, okay, here's what I was getting at before. So, for gorillas, it says here. Let's see here. Yeah, gorillas and orangutans have this distended belly, like a really big belly, because of that fermentation chamber that we were talking about right here. And so, for gorillas, it's a healthy sign of normal eating habits to have this. But when humans get it, then that's called a non-alcoholic related fatty liver syndrome, which humans die from liver failure all the time because of that. So it's super important to keep that insulin response down, because the insulin resistance will lead to this distended belly for various reasons. Not only is the liver growing in size to an unnaturally inflamed state, but you're also receiving inflammation depending on what kind of veggies and fruits the person is eating, as well as the insulin resistance from the required fermentation of a plant-based diet from a vegan human will increase bloating and gas in the intestine, as the fermenting bacteria are trying to keep the human alive. And so that's why we see this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, where I linked here in the Mayo Clinic, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Check this out, it's important stuff here. So for a gorilla, it's a sign of normal healthy eating habits. For a human, it's a sign of insulin resistance, diabetes, fatty liver, liver failure, possible appendectomy, appendicitis type problems. So hope this video helps everyone. Make sure to let your friends know, because this insulin resistance is, even for people who eat meat, this is the reason why people are getting diabetes all the time, because they're doing too much snacking. You want to reduce your snacking between meals, and you want to only eat like 1 or 2 meals a day because of this because of how this insulin response graph works. And we got to be careful, because these doctors who are telling us, oh yeah, you got to do this, well, that that will create insulin resistance, which will create diabetes. And this is exactly the mechanism that is occurring at this time, and why diabetes is so common in our people. And people are, there's like 10,000 limb removals happening all the time, because people's legs start falling off and stuff like that from the diabetes. And this is the reason why, because you don't have a resting state in the digestion and a rebuilding state in the body. You're always in a digesting state, and that's where you get cancer and all this other stuff. All right, guys, thank you. See you later.